And you look at this last week, 4 straight games now in which the Orioles have scored only 2 runs, and not a shock that they've only won one of those, and maybe maybe surprising that they did manage to win one. I mean, it's just you got to hit the ball. This team was constructed to score runs because they understood that they weren't going to have the best pitching staff in baseball. And it's funny. I talked to you throughout the first half of the season, and this went back to before the season even started. I said that their starting pitching needed to just find a way to be mediocre. And if you look at their numbers since the All-Star break, and don't get me wrong, it hasn't been great whatsoever, but their starter ERA has been much more in that territory of 4.5 or so. And they didn't, Kevin Gausman didn't get the job done, gives up the big home run.
Well, part of that is Jimenez has been better. Part of that is Bundy has been better than what they had before, even on their bad nights. I mean, they had some ugly efforts early in the year for some of these guys. I mean, and certainly Wright and, the young guys, Wilson, I mean, those guys couldn't do it, right? I mean, at least in the second half, most nights, you don't look up and see they're losing 6-2 in the 4th inning.
Right. I mean, they've if their offense had played at a comparable level in the second half, they'd be in first place right now because of
it was
the
sitting there. It was waiting there for them. I mean, it was waiting there for them last Wednesday, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? But even throughout this second half, where they're 2 games under 500 since the All-Star break. I mean, it hasn't been an utter collapse. They've always found a way to bounce back when they've gone through tough times, but they haven't been able to prolong those good times like they did in the first half when they had 3 separate 7-game winning streaks, and I believe another 5-game winning streak. And, they were able to string together longer periods of time where they played really, really well. You haven't seen that in the second half. They've had times where they've played well, but it's been much more fleeting, and they've just kind of been almost in that 2015 mode, right? 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps, I mean, it just, you kind of go through that period where you're just not putting together an extended time of really, really playing great baseball, and it reflects in their record, where they haven't made any significant strides, and they've fallen back slightly since the All-Star break. So there's still time here to turn it around to make sure they hold on to a playoff spot. That Toronto moved ahead of them Tuesday night. They're the second wild card right now. Detroit has closed the gap to 1.5 games. They have Arizona coming in over the weekend. They can't just go through the motions against the Red Sox the next couple nights just because the division is all but over with 11 games left and 5 games out of first. They have plenty to play for still, but you got to get the bats woken up. Again, Gausman giving up 5 runs is not ideal. He'd be the first to tell you he was very, very disappointed. Probably in the 7th inning, I asked him about it. I thought the pitch selection to Ortiz, 1-2 count, why not try to bury a splitter low and away? And he and Wieters decided to stick fastball, and the low and away target, he drifted back toward the outer half of the plate, and it was up a little bit, and Ortiz didn't miss it because he hasn't missed pitches all year long, and an incredible season for a 40-year-old. But that right there ruined what was a solid outing. He'd labored, hadn't had the 1-2-3 clean innings, certainly wasn't as dominant as he was at Fenway, but that said, you score 2 runs once again, and look, Rick Porcello doing it fine. He's a 21-game winner. Eduardo Rodriguez was not as good as taking a no-hitter into the 5th inning as he did before Trey Mancini, of all people, breaks it up with a home run. Just Orioles expanded the zone. They didn't have good at-bats. It's something we've seen all too much in the second half, and their record reflects that.
Well, when you say good at-bats, I mean, this was the worry back in March, right? I mean, that it felt like in April and May there was something about the way Buck was managing them, the way they were managing themselves. The conversation was about having good at-bats. Yeah. It now feels like the press is on, and individually, it's just, it kind of looks like when a football team sort of breaks down and nobody's doing their job, as Bill Belichick would say. That's probably the most disappointing part, because they need to rally this thing and at least get themselves into a position to be playing baseball 13 days from now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's, they're definitely pressing. I mean, you can tell, and that's understandable. Any team that's in this kind of a position is going to press. But it's just frustrating because they did show they could do it in the first half. And look, no one expected them to continue what they did in June. I think we all made that very clear, but when you consider they averaged right around 5.1 runs per game in the first half of the season, and they're pretty much a run worse than that since the All-Star break. I mean, that's a significant drop-off right there. As I pointed out, the improvement that they got in the rotation, modest as it was, if they had just maintained their offense to a decent, replica of what they did in the first half, even if they weren't quite as good, this team would be upwards of 20 games over 500, and they'd be in first place. And those things have gone away. What's been left behind has been the home runs, and that's about it. I look at the numbers of Mark Trumbo and Chris Davis. Mark Trumbo's hitting under 200 in the second half of the season. As great as his overall body of work looks, he's been a big disappointment for them in the second half. And he had a career first half. I mean, he'd never done anything like that.
Yeah, I don't know what you were expecting, right? I mean,
sure. Well, you're expecting him not to hit 190. I mean, it's one thing if he's going to hit 235, 240, and still hit some home runs and still be productive. But he's completely fallen off the cliff. And I'm not trying to pick on him individually. There have been a lot of guys. I mean, the only guys who have hit the ball better in the second half, really, than they did in the first, has been Pedro Alvarez and J.J. Hardy. That's basically it.
And Alvarez stunk in the beginning. He couldn't help but get better.
Right. I mean, he was. People were talking about getting rid of him back in May. So.
Weeders. I mean, what's going? I mean, Scope is falling like a rock. I mean, Adam Jones looks like Adam Jones again, just swinging at whatever he wants to. I mean, these are not. Chris Davis is going to end this $161 million year batting .221. I mean,
you mentioned. I mean, Jones is the one guy who's been much more consistent because remember he was so bad.
He was hurt.
Right. I mean, he's. Here lately, he's certainly, the last couple of nights really expanded the zone more so where he's been better in that department this year. But, beyond those few names I mentioned, I mean, Machado, not as good in the second half. Chris Davis clearly has had his big-time issues, for extended periods. I mean, it's just, it's been a really, Hyun-Soo Kim, for as much as I like him, hasn't kept up the rate that he did, which was going to be tough for him to hit 335. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah, how dare he hit 307?
Right, exactly. So, you expected some drop-off. I think that's reasonable. But for them to drop off as dramatically as they have, where they've ranked last in a lot of significant categories in the second half, they weren't constructed to be able to endure that. So, even though their starting pitching has been better than it was in the first half and has been at least mediocre, let's say, since the All-Star break. That hasn't been good enough because the bats have fallen off as dramatically as they have. But again, you can't go through the motions the next couple nights against the Red Sox, even though your division hopes are all but officially done, barring some kind of miracle. But there's nothing miraculous about getting a wild card right now. You just got to get back to playing. You just have to, who has been woeful this year, even though the fact that the Rays have been pretty woeful didn't seem to help the Orioles' cause over the weekend. But then you go on the road, 3 with the Yankees, 3 with Toronto. So you can't sit in the corner and say, woe is me, as Buck Showalter would say, because they still have a lot to play for, and you don't want to get this thing turned totally sideways and find yourself on the outside looking in at the end of next week.
He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net. He will be at Oriole Park at Camden Yards for whatever remains here this week. And I know the Arizona Diamondbacks are coming to town. You start to scoreboard watch a little bit. Now you see if the season ended today, the Orioles would be traveling to Toronto. This is about, this is where this better be the bottom of the ocean, right? I mean, this is where they've really got to turn it on and win some baseball games here over the next 10 days because everybody's looking to chase. I mean, here comes Detroit. They're winning ball games. Here comes Houston. They're winning ball games. This is not going to be an easy couple of weeks. If they thought they didn't like seeing the Red Sox, wait till these other teams get up on them the next 10 days.
Yeah, and we'll see how this plays out. I mean, 2 weeks ago, the Yankees looked like the big threat, and we've seen how they've completely fallen apart. Seattle had the 8-game winning streak to get themselves back in it, but can they sustain that kind of a stretch? We've seen them fall off a little bit here over the last week, although they're certainly still in it. Houston's an interesting team. I mean, at times this year they've looked like one of the better teams in the American League, but the thing that's been their fatal flaw is they couldn't beat the Texas Rangers at all this year, and that's why they're in a position where they're struggling.
Well, they got my dollar, by the way. They were my team to, if you gave me $1, they were my preseason pick to make the playoffs out of all of these teams. I wouldn't have picked Cleveland. I mean, I thought they could be okay. I probably would have picked the White Sox, quite frankly. And in the West, I loved Houston. A lot of people loved Houston. So, over the next 10 days, they have a chance. All these teams, that's the weird part of this scoreboard watching we're doing is I've never had to scoreboard watch with 6 other teams, man.
It's strange. I mean, it's wild. It really is. And the thing about these various teams, they've all had their stretches where they've played really, really well, and they've all had their stretches where they've struggled. And probably the Orioles a little less so than some of these other teams. I mean, Detroit was talking about firing Brad Ausmus back in May. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Kansas City's been disgraceful this year, quite frankly, right?
Houston got off to such a terrible start. And remember that their series against the Orioles kind of turned things around for them for about 2 months, and then they went back in the dumpster, so to speak. Seattle has looked great at times, and they've looked terrible at times. The Orioles have had their struggles in the second half, no doubt, but they haven't gone through that period of time where you just say, PU, they absolutely stink for 2 or 3 weeks. It's just kind of been more, treading water and, kind of just slowly losing ground in the division until the last 6 days where, you go 2-4 to start a homestand that you absolutely needed to play really well. That's where it's felt really, really disappointing. But we'll see how this plays out. I mean, Toronto's won 2 in a row to leapfrog the Orioles, but the Blue Jays have been a colossal disappointment in the month of September. I mean, they were the team 3-4 weeks ago. We were talking about them as being how we're talking about the Red Sox right now.
Well, you are how you pitch, right? Literally. It really isn't about the bats because that's not sustainable. Scoring 10 runs a night is not sustainable. Pitching well is, once you start pitching well, you start to look better. I mean, and I guess that's the story for Toronto all year long. Certainly the story for the Red Sox. I mean, this Red Sox pitching we're seeing, and part of it is being free swinging and not being disciplined and not having patience. But when the Red Sox throw, no hitters into the 5th inning, they tend to win those ball games.
Yeah, but offense still matters a lot. I hear what you're saying, and that is conventional wisdom, but the Red Sox have also scored 100-plus runs more than anyone else.
Well, maybe you can score 10 runs a night. Maybe the Red Sox can.
And in the case of the Orioles, their starting pitching has been better than it was, but their offense has dropped off so much that that difference that the starting pitching would have made has gone by the wayside because they've been so anemic at times offensively.
Yeah, Jay Happ got his 20th win on Tuesday night. If you would have convinced me of that back when they signed him, I would have thought you're smoking hippie lettuce. I really would.
I hope he's sending 10% of that to the Pittsburgh Pirates because they fixed him last year. I don't know what it was they did, but they absolutely fixed him. But your overall point about pitching is right, and we've seen good pitching stop the Orioles quite a bit. Porcello certainly kind of topping that list recently here on Monday night. So, but I mean, for the Orioles, it's simple. We've talked about this, until we've been blue in the face about waiting for the offense to heat up again. I wrote about it Tuesday morning at WNST.net. This team now, I believe, 64 games in the second half. 34 of those games they've scored fewer than 4 runs. I mean, if you have the best pitching in baseball, you can overcome something like that probably. But if you have marginal pitching like the Orioles do, you're not going to overcome that. And in some ways, when you see that kind of a stat, when you see how much they've struggled to score, where they've just barely been over 4 runs per game in the second half, in some ways they're fortunate to only be 2 under 500 since the All-Star break. So can they go on a roll? Can they go on a roll here to secure a wild card? Can they go on a roll to win that wild card game and make some noise in October? Remains to be seen. You always use the example of the Kansas City Royals a couple years ago. At this time 2 years ago, no one was talking about them as a serious contender whatsoever, and a month later they were in the World Series. So I'm not saying that's going to happen for the Orioles, but that's you kind of have to draw from inspiring stories such as that to kind of dust yourself off here after a really difficult, costly week and get back on the horse and start winning some baseball games again.
Jimenez and Buchholz, Tillman and Price, and then the Arizona Diamondbacks bring the likes of Shelby Miller and for the Orioles. Let's put them into the closet here for a minute. We're going back to the ballpark. The Ravens get ready beginning today and through the week for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I know we will discuss it at length. Any thoughts going into this week? I mean, I was with Eric Weddle on Tuesday night up at Adams Jeep in Aberdeen, swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry, and for There Goes My Hero, and I think spirits are really up out there. I mean, it's been a little while since there's been 2-0 and pep in the step and going to Jacksonville and looking at, just looking down the line at a Redskins team that's struggling, an Oakland team that's got to come West Coast, East Coast and play. This is a nice little setup for, by the time the World Series gets going, for the Ravens to maybe be 5-2 or something dreamy like that, right?
Yeah, and it's fine for us to look ahead, but that kind of mentality, you got to be very careful this week. I mean, this is a Jacksonville team that was awful this past week, but they gave the Green Bay Packers everything they could handle in Week 1. They're a team that does have a lot of talent. This is one I think you got to be very careful with going on the road. Let's face it, as nice as the comeback was against Cleveland, you cannot have a start anything resembling what happened in the first quarter in Cleveland on Sunday, or you're going to get beat. You just are. You can't afford to play like that against 96% of teams in the NFL. So, that's not to say that they shouldn't feel good about themselves right now. Certainly, being 2-0 is much better than the feeling of 0-2 where they were a year ago at this time. But you just have to continue to make the corrections that you need to make on both sides of the football. They got to figure out their running game. That's something that's been largely a non-factor for them. And to win on the road consistently, Terrell Suggs always talks about it. You got to bring your defense and your running game. And the Ravens were able to get away with that, not having the latter as much against the Browns. But this is a Jacksonville team. This is a game I penciled in as a loss before the season started because, one, I thought Jacksonville was going to be better than they've shown. So, based on Week 2, you feel better about it. But they played pretty darn well in Week 1. But, for this Ravens team, you're right. When you look at this pre-bye schedule, it's sitting right there for them to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5-2, or even 6-1, I dare say. And quite frankly, they need to be in that kind of a territory going into the second half, because what the schedule looks like in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I've seen Pittsburgh play, and I'll probably see them play again on Sunday. I mean, they look good, and that's the concern right now is, wow, the Steelers might win 12, 13, 14 games this year if we're not all careful.
Yeah, if they stay healthy, and that's a big if, that's always the X factor for even the best teams out there. You're one injury away from your season basically being wrecked. So, but Pittsburgh's look tough, and there are plenty of other tough teams on the schedule in the second half of the season. So, even that December game against Philadelphia, that looked like a total laugher on paper. The Eagles look pretty good over their first couple games. And I'm not saying I'd say the Ravens would be an underdog.
I'm a huge Eagles fan this week, by the way. Just so you can let your brother-in-law know, Cheryl out there, Brett, all the people I know that like the Eagles. Fly, Eagles, fly this week, baby.
Yeah, and got to be impressed with Carson Wentz.
You got to be, right?
It's funny. As you know, my sister's fiance is an Eagles fan, and was talking to him over the summer, and we were talking about their quarterback situation. I said, forget about Sam Bradford, forget about Chase Daniel. Play the kid. Do what the Ravens did in 2008. If you have a reasonable offensive line that he's not going to get totally killed back there, let him play, because he's going to take his bumps. You're going to see what he can do, and you know what? You're going to know much quicker about it, whether he's your guy or not, than these teams that let a guy sit for a year or two. I don't understand that mentality. We've seen the Ravens. The Ravens did it with Kyle Bowler. Clearly didn't work out in that case, but you knew quicker, I guess, and you can argue that Brian Billick and the organization held on to the thought of Kyle Bowler a little too long. But in the case of Joe Flacco, you knew after a few weeks that you had a guy, and you knew you had a guy that you could win with. And we'll see about Carson Wentz. It's 2 games, but it's just it's interesting to see that. But anyway, back to the Ravens. It's absolutely a schedule that shapes up that this team could be 5-2 at the bye and give themselves not wiggle room because you have to keep playing at a high level, but give themselves an opportunity to really solidify a playoff spot in the second half of the season, with the understanding that you're probably going to lose some games, probably lose more games in the second half of the season. But in order to be in that position, you have to have that kind of a start where you're 5-2 or even a little bit better going into the bye. And so far so good at 2-0, but Ravens know they need to play better certainly than they did against Cleveland overall on Sunday.
We're doing double duty. Luke will be at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. He'll also be on the backfields at Owings Mills, the hardest working man in Baltimore sports media. Meanwhile, I sit here and talk about sports all day. You can find Luke at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as at our WNST Twitter, and of course Luke at WNST.net. And don't send him any criticism. Send it all to me. I'm Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Anything you miss, you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. You can also get our morning newspaper delivered to your email inbox at 7 a.m. every morning. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never least, breaking news does happen first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And of course, Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday, driving you home, getting you ready for Thursday Night Football, as well as Thursday Night Baseball and a weekend of baseball and a weekend of football. It's all good. Terps are undefeated. The Ravens are undefeated. The Orioles would still be in the wild card if the season ended today, but it doesn't end today. It ends next Sunday, and they got to win some baseball games at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Don't forget, next Wednesday night, we will be back in Hampstead, Carroll County, with two Ravens. We have Ryan Jensen from the offensive line, as well as new starter Alex Lewis, who's starting at the left guard position. It's going to be a great night. We're going to eat crab cakes. We're going to talk football. We really enjoyed Eric Weddle on Tuesday night. Got him onto the Bone Marrow Registry for There Goes My Hero. Had a great conversation about his love of sports and competition and his beard as well. A lot of talk about the beard up in Aberdeen with Eric Weddle. You can check that out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 in WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.